Hi, I'm Cassidy Kuchenbecker with Environmental Initiatives. We are an indoor environmental testing company. We assess buildings for asbestos, water damage, mold, moisture, other types of contaminants. We come in when people are getting sick and they don't know why they're getting sick, or if there's funny odors or other types of similar environmental issues. Today we're going to be talking about ice damming and attic condensation issues or mold growth in attics. Both of these items occur because of heat and moisture and air from the house rising up into the attic, and they're part and parcel of the same thing. And we have a lot of this problem in Wisconsin, being that we're in such a cold climate. We have, 4 or 5 months of winter. And sometimes people have some pretty dramatic issues regarding ice damming and mold growth. Here's a couple of pictures. When you see icicles forming on people's roofs, yeah, it's beautiful. It's winter idyllic sort of scenery, but it means there's a problem. It means that snow is melting on the roof improperly. Or like this poor gentleman who called me in because he was worried about his attic mold, but what I was worried about was the 2 feet thick ice dams that were quite literally pulling apart his house in two. So we're going to talk about what happens, how to address these things. So first off, we're going to talk about ice damming. Ice damming happens when heat from the house rises into the attic and melts the snow, and that snow, then the water then goes down to the edge of the roof. But because it's still winter and still cold, that water then freezes, creating an ice dam. Then, when more snow melts, that water goes down to the roof edge and hits the ice dam and then builds up. That water builds up and then goes up under the shingles, and then the water goes into our ceilings or into our walls, and that's an ice dam. So, ice dam happens because snow improperly melts in just parts of the roof instead of melting all at once because it's warm. Most of the time, this issue is because of airflow through the attic. So the air gets up around lights or around chimneys. So it's almost always an airflow issue. Occasionally, the issue is the result of improper insulation. So a part of the roof that has low insulation, and so that part of the roof decking gets warm while the rest of the roof decking stays cold. Sometimes that's the issue. Rarely the issue is from a lack or not enough ventilation with outdoor air, with letting that outdoor air come in and cool the roof decking. Rarely that's actually the problem. I go in attics all the time with no ventilation and they don't have a problem. And I go into attics with horrible ice damming that have great ventilation. It just matters really how much heat is getting into the attic to cause it. And then once in a while, the issue is an architectural blunder, like roofs are pitched in a certain way that just doesn't work, and it was a bad design. So if you're dealing with an ice damming issue, don't call a roofer. Instead, first look at the attic floor, determine if air is getting into the attic, where it needs to be air sealed, and usually you can figure that out just by looking at where the ice dam is. Go to where the ice dam is physically happening, go in 10, 15 feet, and then look up. You're going to see something probably that allows air into the attic. Maybe it's a recessed light, but that's where you want to start. You want to start by air sealing the attic floor. Then think about insulation. If the insulation is really low or bad, again, where the ice damming is actually happening, like 10 feet up the roof, yeah, maybe that's your issue. If all of that seems great, but for some reason, because of the way the roof is built, you think that it is ventilation, then maybe you add ventilation with a contractor. But honestly, start with those other two items first. Now, the next step is after you take care of figuring out why the ice damming is occurring, then you're going to need to address the damage from it. So we're going to have water that has entered into the wall and the ceiling below. Sometimes, if the ice damming is limited or the water entry is limited, it does dry up fast enough that we just don't care. But if you know that a sizable area stayed wet, when I say sizable, like 10 square feet stays wet for like a week, you know that you're going to have mold and bacteria growth within that wall, for example, because it'll stay wet for quite a while then. And it might not be a health issue for most people, but it can be an odor issue. In the spring, sometimes when it gets warm and humid again, you can smell the microbial odors coming off that area of damage. So normally what happens if it stays wet for too long, for like a week, then you end up hiring a restoration company to install plastic containment and remove those sections of ceiling or wall to dry it out and clean the wood. And that's just what has to happen once in a while. So when we talk about these when we talk about the air entry into attics, right? We said before that it comes around chimneys or it comes around lights. We call these bypasses, and there's a whole lot of different bypasses that you need to consider in a residence. There's areas, like I said, the recessed lights. There's pipe runs where pipes go into the attic if there's too big of a hole around the pipe. Again, that space, the space between the attic floor and the masonry of the chimney, that space allows air to go up into the attic. But also, so does the lowering of ceilings. And I'll explain what that means and how that happens. And then, of course, bathroom exhaust fans, kitchen exhaust fans venting to the attic, that's going to bring in a lot of heat as well. The attic hatch not being properly air sealed, that allows a lot of air into the attic. And there's a lot of additional options. So when we look at this picture here, this is actually the kitchen of the gentleman who had the 2-foot ice dams that was really freaking me out. And as soon as I walked inside, I knew why he had the ice dams. We have all these recessed lights, and we have the lowering of ceilings. And I'm going to show you what it looks like from the top side. So recessed lights, the lights that go into the attic, these recessed lights are supposed to be what we call insulated and sealed, which means the light has some sort of insulation, so that insulating value to it, so that other items can touch it without being too hot, and that all the holes, all the openings in the metal housing are closed. In this picture that you see here, those little holes that you see that are allowing light through, well, that allows air through. Those holes were supposed to be covered by this foam tape, which just wasn't done by the contractor when they installed the light. So lots of air is getting into the attic. Now, as a layperson, real estate agent, home inspector, whatever, who's going through a building looking at things, if you're thinking that the recessed lights might be allowing air through, oftentimes you'll see cobwebs in them. Cobwebs are actually little particles. They get trapped. The little particles become electrostatically charged, and they'll build onto each other, and then they'll form these webs. So cobwebs happen where air is flowing, air is moving, and then the particles build up into webs. So if you look into a light with a flashlight and you see a bunch of webbing, you know air is going through. Now, how do we address this? Well, you could just replace the light with a properly sealed and insulated light. However, they also make these coverings. They kind of look like wizard hats or dunce caps or whatever, that they go over the light and then you seal that hat down to the floor. So there are options that you can get at home stores to address lights without having to replace them. The other thing I said with that kitchen, the picture of the kitchen, was that the lowering of the ceiling above the cabinetry is allowing air into the attic. And this happens in bathrooms too. So a lot of times you'll have ice damming and mold growth above or near bathrooms because of the lowering of the ceiling at the shower or at the counters or the sink cabinetry. So when the ceiling lowers, it exposes the wall cavities all the way around. So you can see in this picture that we can see right down the wall cavities all the way around where the ceiling comes down. The other spot where this happens is in stairwells. Sometimes like a stairwell to a second floor or whatever will have a lowered ceiling. That allows a lot of air into the attics. So what do we do about these lowered ceilings? Well, you air seal the top sides. Sometimes they just use plastic. They throw plastic in there and they seal that down, and that totally works. But usually what people do is that they will tightly roll fiberglass insulation. They'll tightly roll it and shove it into the top of the wall cavities, and then they'll use that fiberglass insulation as like a backer, so then they can spray foam inside to air seal it. The reason that you're putting the fiberglass insulation in there first is because if you try to spray foam a wall cavity, the top of the wall cavity, without anything in there, spray foam just keeps going down. So they need something to shove in there. For attic hatches, first off, when you have the very large attic hatches, like with the pull down stairs, those things are really hard to air seal. And you might have to actually build a box that goes above it that is better air sealed. But for anything else, what you need to do is you need to have at least a foam weather strip between the hatch and where the hatch rests upon, so that you can visibly see that there's no gaps when you close the hatch. If you hire a professional company to do this, they'll include some weightage to the top of the hatch so it kind of pushes down, and maybe clamps on the bottom to really pull down the hatch. I don't know how useful that always is, but that's usually what they'll end up doing. Regarding any sort of exhaust fans that go into the attic, first off, you can't just let the exhaust fan vent to a turtle vent. It needs to be vented directly through the roof decking itself, otherwise some air is going to escape into the attic. If the exhaust fan is venting into the soffit, it's okay, but it's too frequent where the air just goes down and then comes right back up the next soffit vent. So preferably don't vent into the soffits, preferably vent it all the way through the roof decking. Some people will say that you need to remove the attic insulation and air seal every single opening in the attic floor. The answer is no, you do not need to do that. You don't need to go that far. You need to hit the major primary areas where air gets up, and then watch it. Watch it the next winter. See if you still have an issue, and if so, if it's more localized, so you have to air seal a little bit better in a specific spot. All right, so we talked about ice damming. Ice damming happens because heat is entering the attic. Usually it's through the form of airflow entering the attic. Sometimes it's from insulation not being good enough in certain spots, causes the snow to melt. That water runs down, freezes, forms a dam, and then as more water goes, more snow melts and water goes down, it hits the ice dam, and then the water comes in the house. All right, let's drop that idea. Now we're going to talk about attic mold. Attic mold is the same idea. It's because of it happens in winter, and it happens because of moisture condensing on the cold roof. Sometimes it looks really freaky. The whole attic will be black or white or whatever and have mold everywhere. Now here's the thing about attic mold. It does not affect air quality in the living space. It doesn't. Air from the house goes into the attic. Attic air doesn't come down. I've done this job for 23 years. Like, I've seen thousands of attics with attic issues, and never have I ever actually seen it come down in the house. And I would know. I'm a microbiologist. I use a microscope when I'm on people's houses. I take a lot of samples. So it's a cosmetic issue. We don't want it to happen because over time the roof decking can get damaged because of the excess condensation, but we're addressing it because of the visual impact of it all, primarily. Sometimes that mold is dark. Sometimes the mold is white and it's hard to see. Like in this picture, you might not be able to notice that there's actually mold all over that roof decking. Usually the white mold is caught when the color of the when it contrasts with the color of the roof decking better. Like in this picture. This picture is pretty easy to see that there's a mold issue. All right, so we're going to use clues, patterns of condensation to tell us like where the issue is happening. Where is the air coming into the attic? Where do we need to focus the air sealing to stop the moisture issue from happening? So first off, when you see a pattern like in this picture, clearly that is a water leak. That's coming around a chimney or a vent or something. When you see a very specific spot of blackening from water coming down like that, that's not a condensation problem. You need to do something else. That's not even what we're talking about here. Uh, if you see mold generally everywhere throughout the whole attic, then honestly you don't know where the air is getting into the attic and where you should focus your air sealing because it could come from anywhere. However, if you see something like this picture where it's a very specific strip of condensation, well, you don't need someone like me. Don't hire me. You can have anyone go there and figure out where the air is getting into the attic directly at the spot that's allowing the moisture to condense up and down that roof decking. Now, if you see mold just at the soffits, it doesn't mean the humidity is coming near the soffit. That's not what it means. When you see mold just at the soffits, which happens a lot, that simply means moisture is getting into the attic somewhere, floating around, and the coldest spot of the roof decking is at the vents. It's at the soffit vents. And that's where the moisture condenses first and you get the condensation, but it came somewhere else. It came into the attic somewhere else. This is also a good picture to show when people say that you have to vent attics to stop mold issues in attics. That's bogus. You can't vent the moisture out fast enough. You have to air seal so the moisture doesn't get into the attic in the first place. In this case, of course, ventilation didn't help because that's just where the condensation decided to form. Now, a couple pattern ideas. First off, If you have mold growing on the north or the east roof decking, those are the coldest roof decks. That means your air, your moisture could have came into the attic anywhere and then finally found the cold spots, the north and east. So that doesn't help you out to tell you where it's coming from. But if you see mold growing on the south or the west roof decking, that's different. That means the source of the humidity was probably right below the mold. Because that's, if the moisture is coming up, it's going to hit that south roof deck and condense right away. And that south roof deck is warmer. So if you see mold on the south or the west, assume that the source of the air getting into the attic is directly below it. And that's where it condensed. If the mold is on the north or the east, that's just really cold roof decking. Your moisture could have came in anywhere and finally condensed when it could on the coldest north and east. Now, whether the mold is brown and black or green and white also tells you something. Dark colored molds in attics are almost always normal outdoor molds. These are the molds that grow anywhere outside. They will grow slowly over time and they like low levels of condensation. Low levels. So, over time, air coming around an attic hatch or something like that. When you see green, white, or tan mold, those molds are the interesting molds. They grow a heck of a lot faster and they would need much more condensation. Sometimes that means it's a new source of humidity, like someone just got a April air that they're overrunning and now it's like really humid in the house. That can go from a small amount of green mold to like the whole attic in just a week. So those can go fast. Or it could be a very small amount of mold because there's a very specific spot where lots of humidity comes but all at once. And then it condenses and then it's over. It condenses, it's over. Usually that means hot tubs or someone who has a very steamy shower where it's very specific moments of condensation. That's green, white, or tan. Lots of condensation, short period of time. So those are uh, two minor items. Okay, so now we have identified why the attic is getting moldy, where the humidity is getting into the attic, so you know what to air seal so that the air doesn't come in anymore. Now we're going to think about whether we're going to remediate the mold in the attic or not. I said before that mold in the attic does not affect air quality. It's a condensation issue, or it's a cosmetic issue. So this might affect resale value. So many times during a real estate transaction, the roof decking does get cleaned to make it look pretty. Sometimes the roof decking gets cleaned just because the homeowner is freaking out and they can't stand to think of the idea of the mold in the attic. That's totally fine. I get it. So back in the day, the way it used to be done, back in the 90s and early 2000s, restoration companies would get called for attic mold and they would simply paint over the mold with an antimicrobial paint so you'll see a white attic. And that was an issue because it's alarming looking. It looks weird, like, why is your attic white? But also, the contractors never actually fixed the sources of humidity that entered the attic, so more mold grew on top of the paint. Then, in the mid 2000s, a lot of companies started blasting the mold off the roof decking using cryoblasting or baking soda blasting, and it would quite literally blast it off, and it's kind of like abrading it. It's like sandpaper. It removes the first couple of layers of wood cells, the cell layers, and which is good. It removed the mold and it removed a lot of the staining, and it made the roof decking look pretty. That's fine. Um, but now the way everyone does it is that they clean off the loose mold with nylon brushes, soapy water, whatever, and then they apply a bleaching product, usually literally bleach, sodium hypochlorite products, or hydrogen peroxide products, things that bleach the surface to help remove the staining. The truth is, some companies don't do a great job cleaning the mold off, and then they'll rely more on the product to bleach it out to make it look like it's gone when really it's just invisible. And honestly, I don't care. Because the mold wasn't an issue before, if it's there but decolorized, fine. It looks good as long as you stop your humidity sources so it doesn't grow back. So these are the things that they use, and some of the commonly used products that companies use these days. You'll hear things like a product called Serum 1000, which is a hydrogen peroxide. Then there's mold and mildew remover. There's rapid mold remover, instant mold stain remover. Clearly, people aren't very creative with their names, but really, it's almost always bleach, sodium hypochlorite, that's at a higher level, and hydrogen peroxide. So, improper remediation methods, things that you shouldn't be paying for. First off, if they clean the roof decking, but they don't decolorize it. What's the purpose? It still looks bad, and that's really the issue. So, if they clean but they don't properly decolorize, that's a problem. If they decolorize but they don't correct the moisture sources, and so you still have humidity get into the attic, you're going to have mold the next year, and you're going to be really upset about that. Another improper remediation method most of the time is automatically removing the insulation. The insulation, if it has mold spores in it from what grew on the roof, you know what? Those molds are already floating into the attic because they're from outdoors. The attic insulation already has a bunch of mold spores in it, and it doesn't matter. If the insulation is really damaged from like a lot of condensation and it compacts, yeah, sure. Removing the insulation for that reason, fine. Or if you think you have a lot of issues of like moving around as you're trying to clean and you get rid of the insulation for the work progress, I get it, totally fine. Another improper remediation method is fogging or spraying antimicrobials. There is absolutely no reason to fog anywhere in an attic or in the house antimicrobials or randomly spraying them to try to kill the mold. It doesn't matter. First off, you're not actually killing all the mold, but more of these mold spores are coming in the next minute from outside anyway, and and going on the roof decking. So it doesn't pay to try to kill it. You stop the moisture so that it doesn't grow. That's where you put your money into. Here's a picture where they painted the roof decking, and then years later, mold grew. And I see this. I was dealing with this a lot in the 2010s because of the work that was done in the 2000s. It's less now because these issues have gone away because people are actually air sealing. Here's a picture where someone had blasted off the mold. No, this is actually a picture probably where they use a destainer, and it looks great. This was previously completely black, and now it looks really nice. And this is what you want to see when you're done with an attic job. Now, let's talk about moisture sources. So when people hire me to do attic assessments, they always get surprised when I first go into their basement. But what I'm doing is I'm looking for sources of humidity, sources of moisture that they need to control so they don't have too much of a problem. And there's many different sources that I'll be looking for. I'll be looking at your dryer, your clothes dryer to make sure it's not venting into the house. I'll be looking at your water heaters and your furnaces. I'll be looking at how many plants you have, how many fish tanks you have, all sorts of things. And we have to consider all these different sources when we try to address this issue. Something we definitely see a lot of problems with is damp basements, crawl spaces with water in them. You know, if you have an earth floor crawl space or a sand crawl space floor, that's going to release a lot of moisture into your house and then into your attic in wintertime. You can't have earth or sand crawl space or floors in a house. Uh, Excessive amounts of water through the foundation wall can be an issue sometimes, although it's winter, so there's less water coming through the foundation. People hanging their clothes to dry in the basement, sorry, you can't do that. You just can't do that. And again, like I said, clothes dryers that aren't properly venting outdoors. No, if you see a bunch of lint in a basement, you know that's probably one of the issues because all that moisture is coming in. People improperly running their April airs or their whole house humidifiers, running that too high. And issues with the furnace can go by. For example, the heat exchanger. When you burn gas, every pound of gas that you burn, you get 1.4 or so pounds of water vapor. So if there's an issue with the heat exchanger, which is the metal tube that the gas goes through or the flames go through, if there's a crack in there, gases will come into your ductwork, which of course there's an issue with carbon monoxide and other air quality issues, but you can have a lot of moisture because of that issue. Water heaters, again, burning gas, and if that gas is coming in, you're going to have a problem. And if you have a real green thumb and you grow a lot of plants, that's going to be an issue. Humidifiers. Sometimes people use too many humidifiers in wintertime in their rooms. And then hot tubs, excessive hot showers, things like that. And sometimes it's just the number of people living in the size of the house. Maybe the house is really tight. Maybe there's a lot of people. Humidity produced by them. So when you are addressing attic mold, don't just call a contractor to clean it or call a roofer to add more ventilation. You need to get someone to go in your house and look at If there's elevated sources of moisture, things that have to be controlled so the humidity stays low in the house, you have to have someone look at the attic floor to figure out where the air gets into the attic so you know what to air seal. And then the mold growth itself. Again, whether you clean it or not, or make it look pretty or not, really depends on your situation and when you decide to sell the house, or you know whether you care about it. But these things, it's very individual, and it matters to some, doesn't matter to others. If you have questions about ice damming or attic mold or any other types of indoor environmental questions, please email us, call us, or visit our website or our blog. Thank you very much. I'm Cassidy with Environmental Initiatives. Thank you very much.